This week in Pure Reinvention.
If they're showing up just to sit at a quarterly meeting so that their name is on stationery, that's not the engaged board member that we're looking for.
Episode 128, Deanna Richeson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. You know, Mike, the interview with Deanna Richeson, that was great. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to actually interview with her. I had to find my own space within that opportunity. So thank you.
Well, you are a perfect example of owning your work and being professionally curious and wanting to have those opportunities, and you never disappoint. Deanna Richeson interview, Sonya, to me was just very dramatic in the kinds of things that Deanna discussed. For example, we talk a lot about the importance of diversity, and especially with a lot of businesses, they struggle with what are the more historical kinds of diversity. But Deanna used a different word to describe diversity that almost any business or any association could use, and that's the diversity of contribution. What an impressive thought.
Yes, that was impressive. And understanding that because she has a limited staff, how important it was for her to have a diversified board as well in their contributions.
And I know that, Sonya, when you heard this phrase, you were really struck by it, but you've heard Deanna use it a number of times now, where she talks about quantum growth versus incremental growth.
Yes, those are my two most favorite words now.
It is, to me, a dramatic setting of the table when you describe the kind of growth you expect in a quantum kind of description, because you don't hear that very often, do you?
No, I don't.
So the other thing that I think is very important for our listeners to be listening for, and this is something Deanna was extremely focused on, is the importance of an executive listening. Let's let our listeners listen to this podcast, and then, Sonya, let's talk a little bit more in depth about those two really important key things.
Yes. This week's episode is sponsored by MB Strategies. MB Strategies focuses on your success and provides you with sustainable results by identifying opportunities, guiding you through implementation, and navigating you to greater results. Contact MB Strategies today at mbstrategiesllc.com to start your reinvention journey. Welcome to Pure Reinvention, and I'm Sonya Robinson, here today with Deanna Richeson, President and CEO of the Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association. We're so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Sonya. I'm glad to be here.
So we usually start each of our podcasts with 3 questions. The first being, of the 5 steps in Pure Reinvention, which one do you most closely align yourself with?
The step that I most closely aligned with is disruption.
What's your superpower?
My superpower, I would say, is to embrace change and engage and collaborate other stakeholders.
Describe a recent uncomfortable situation.
I was hired by the Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association to be a CEO. I, had never been a CEO before. I'd been in director of operations position, director of sales position, but not in the CEO position. And secondly, I did not have background in the lodging and tourism industry, and I hadn't managed an association before.
So a lot of first times.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about the role of the board of directors in helping you get acclimated to those first times?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about what traditional board of directors role is versus, and I'd worked with boards of directors before, but again, not in the CEO role. So I had the privilege of working with a board who was very progressive and intending to transform our association. The role of the board is to help create the vision from the industry's perspective about where the association will grow.
So do you think they should be hands-on in that guidance and direction?
I definitely think they should be hands-on in terms of vision, not in the administration.
Do you think that the board's role is well defined, or does it adjust based upon the leadership?
I definitely think that it adjusts based on the leadership. The long-term vision role of the board does not change. What they do from meeting to meeting and in between those quarterly board meetings will change based on where you are with your vision.
Understanding that the theme of our conversation today surrounds that of own, what is it that you want our listeners to know from a CEO's perspective? What does that ownership look like? And then we can step into, from the board's perspective in working with the CEO, what do you think? So first, from a CEO's lens, what are the own requirements to deliver the end goal?
I think it's critical that the board shows up, that they own it. And when I say show up, I mean not every board member brings the same contributions to their seat and role on the board. It might be that they are contributing in terms of their network, who they can connect with, what their resources are. For example, to help us find sponsors, to help us open doors within the industry, in our case, the lodging and tourism industry. It could be that they're going to actually send teams to and their staff to our annual conference or to the golf outing, the legislative conference. Do they participate on one of our committees? If they're showing up just to sit at a quarterly meeting so that their name is on stationery, that's not the engaged board member that we're looking for. In the past, we were very constrained that only board members were the ones who would have decision-making authority, decision-making influence, or positions with committees. We quickly realized that we needed to open up the engagement. So now members can hold committee chair positions. It's not relegated only to board members. So we're really opening up the access of who can help influence what this organization is doing.
That's motivating, to allow people to rise from within and take on those leadership roles.
Yes.
In fact, leadership roles that they may not actually be able to serve in their workplace.
Yes, and people are hungry for that.
Yes.
And then it comes right from the eye level of industry. It's industry that is shaping what their trade association is doing for their industry. It's run by them, not by a small body of people sitting in an office in Okemos. And so, committee chairs. I want to do a starters course with our committee chairs. Get them zinged and all aligned, and this is the direction we want you to go. We want to collectively go. So I don't know. We kind of have an idea what the horizon looks like, but for the committee chairs, this is your sandbox of ownership, and you can do so these are your boundaries, but go at it. Go hard, go fast, have fun. Let's do it.
Looking back within the organization of MLTA, Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association, are there committees within the MLTA structure?
Yes, when I came on board in my position about a year ago, all but 2 of the committees that had previously been established had become much less active. They'd gone dormant, if you will.
Why was that?
The thought was that the committees would serve only in an advisory role, and because of the small size of the staff, the primary activities were 1, advocacy, which trade associations obviously are the advocacy voice for their industry. So that was still very strong. We had a government affairs committee. And the second one was the conference planning committee. Our annual conference is one of the big revenue generators for our budget. And so there were those 2 committees that were very active. It became clear to me that as we looked at the objective of achieving quantum growth, so big growth in short time, a staff of 2.5 or 3.5 people were not going to accomplish that without more engagement from our board and our membership. So we reactivated the 5 other committees. Actually, it was 3 other committees, and we created 2 new ones and looked for our board of directors to volunteer to either serve on a committee or chair a committee.
Recently, you hosted a major conference for MLTA in Detroit, and I understand that you were very wowed by that opportunity. But in delivering that experience and planning for that effort, I imagine that you had to take some ownership surrounding that. What was your role in that perspective?
It was my first very large conference. It's a 2.5-day conference. There are anywhere from 10 to 15 speakers, breakout sessions. It crosses a wide spectrum of segments of our industry. So it was really important that I listen and pay attention to what was important to the various segments, stakeholders of the industry, in what would exceed expectations for that conference.
What was one of the things?
I was hearing that some folks felt that there wasn't enough representation and content for some of the segments of the industry. Smaller communities and convention and visitors bureaus felt that previous conferences had really focused just on Michigan's largest cities or the resort towns. So I visited some of those smaller CVBs and asked them what would they think would fill the need for their smaller communities. And as a result, we ended up with a breakout session on voluntourism, one on cultural tourism. Some of the big ideas session speakers came from areas well beyond our large cities in Michigan. And I think it really helped bring to the table more participation and satisfaction as a result of the conference.
Now, how many people do you have within MLTA, paid staff?
We just added a few months ago one full-time position, and that brought us to 3.5 people.
3.5 people. And then your conference was how large?
We had a record attendance of over 1,000 participants in person and another 423 who participated in an online career fair. So that was a huge event over 2.5 days. We had 26 speakers.
And are we saying that it was those 3 people that pulled that together to deliver that? And you were one of the people that put your ear to the ground trying to understand what it was that will actually be delivered by way of that conference.
Yeah, there's a conference planning committee that had been a standing committee for a long time. And so when I heard that there was some dissatisfaction about the contributions and who had a voice at that table, I went out to those other organizations and asked if they wanted to send a representative to sit on that committee. So we did have some new committee members that had the opportunity to voice their ideas during the planning process. So it wasn't just our 3.5 people that planned that conference. It was a large committee. But I think it was really important that we expanded who had access to serve on the committee.
Deanna, if our listeners want to connect with you, how can they reach you?
You can call me at Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association, 517-267-8989, or by email at Deanna, DEANNAR, at milodging.org.
So, Sonya, as we now kind of follow up to this awesome interview that you had with Deanna, I want to loop back around to this thing called diversity of contribution and have you describe how almost any business or association or organization can use diversity of contribution to their advantage.
One of the most important parts was that she has a working board and that the board itself has to show up. And with that working board, being an extension of her staff of 2 or 3, she's able to take on or utilize their respective skills and contributions to better suit and to uplift the MLTA association.
It is the word diversity is such a common word that is used to describe gender or to describe ethnic background or now to describe the different generations from boomers to millennials and everything in between. And seldom do you hear it described as the diversity of contribution. And I am so struck by how important that phrase is in a business sense, because diversity of thought and then therefore the contribution that thought is able to drive is extremely healthy for a business. Too much of the same tends to be a problem. And so diversity of contribution, which is driven from the diversity of thought, allows you to have especially in a small organization like what Deanna is describing, a staff of less than 6, the ability to engage multiple energies, board, suppliers, small staff, but almost any intellect that wants to own can be a part of this because she's encouraging diversity of contribution.
That's what I got excited about when I heard that part of the conversation, because sometimes in my experience has been that organizations select their board members based upon that board members of organization, which usually ties into what dollars that organization is able to contribute. But the concept that Deanna was sharing with us offers the opportunity for the board members to dig in deeper than just their pockets, but also to dig into their hearts and their souls and to give back to the community, to drive the mission and the vision of the organization, utilizing their extension of resources.
Which, in a way, completely describes what ownership really means when you go to that kind of depth. Now, the other phrase that was extremely impressive and I think had some significance to both you and I, Sonya, was this concept of quantum growth versus incremental growth, and how it's very safe to have small incremental growth of 2 to 5% a year. But how do you really get 50 to 100% increase in revenue growth, for example, in a short period of time, 3 to 5 years, unless you're willing to engage and get your total organization to own the mission? And that allows for that quantum growth, which I know really struck you very deeply.
It did. And as being a listener and a supporter of Pure Reinvention, when I listened to Deanna's story, she mentioned how when she was brought in as president and CEO of MLTA, they had already reached quantum growth, but she was there to sustain that quantum growth. And so for listeners like myself, it's like, how can you already perfect something that's already good? What characteristics are necessary in order to continue that sustainable momentum of quantum growth?
And as we've learned from Deanna, that's a journey that never ends, and it has integral to its success that component of ownership. And then Deanna, of course, in owning it herself, also then broadened that ownership to allow anyone who wanted to be in a piece of the ownership in order to drive that quantum growth. It's a very impressive journey from a very impressive individual. And Sonya, I think you just did a very impressive job of capturing the essence of what this key leader is in the association industry. So if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.